All right, now we're going to move into the families that we see on a day-to-day basis, the families that either have family violence involved with them, substance abuse issues, and substance abuse also covers the alcohol piece. They've got a caregiver that's mentally ill, or they have a teen parent. Before I get there, though, I want to make one more connection for you. We do a whole lot of talking in child welfare about attachment or bonding, and then the word attunement. And so I want to make sure that all of us understand that attachment is highly dependent, or if not solely dependent, on interactions. I want to make sure that everybody has a really clear understanding of what attachment means. And then, because of the child welfare system, the system is designed to impact attachment and attunement. And I'm going to talk about the factors that within the system can make a difference in the way that we approach families and what the outcomes are. So when we talk about attachment and that social emotional piece, there's some things for those of you that are child welfare connected, whether you're DCF, FFN, or you're a COPE assessor, that really, if you could start thinking about what it is that you're reporting about attachments. And what I read a lot is the baby appears to be attached to the mother. There is no attachment. The definition of attachment is, the first thing, it has to be reciprocal. If I say I'm attached to Rodney, but Rodney's not feeling it, in the adult world, I'm a stalker. Okay? Right? Same thing in the child's world. If I, as a child, want to feel attached to that mom or dad, and the mom or dad, because of mental illness, substance abuse, maybe there's family violence going on, can't feel it back, there's no attachment. And vice versa. If I really feel this strong pull to that child, I feel attached to that child, but because of the child welfare system, maybe I was in jail for 30, 40, 50 days, a year, and the child does not feel an attachment to me, no attachment. The second piece of that definition, it has to be profound. It just can't be an ordinary once a week for an hour piece, all right? So reciprocal, profound. And then the third piece is of that definition, it has to meet both of ours, both parties, emotional as well as physical needs. I am just naive enough to think that most parents of young children get something from just a hug from their child. They get an emotional need met, they get a physical need met, just the way the children do. So those are the three criteria when we are talking about definition, or we're writing up a report, or we're reporting to somebody else about attachment. And then the last piece is that attachment is going to set the stage for all the future relationships. So what is attachment dependent on? Attachment is dependent on 4 criteria. And I want you to kind of think about the child welfare as you listen to child welfare system, if you will. The infant's temperament. And Mariana, poor Mariana, I've been picking on her all day. Mariana was talking about on the break, colicky babies. Anybody here really have a colicky baby? What's it like? Nightmare. Okay? No child welfare overlay, maybe a great environment. Because of that baby's temperament, because of a health issue, it may be real hard to attach just because of temperament, no other reason why, okay? I'll use the example of my own 2 kids. I have 2 boys, 18 months apart. First child was perfect, temperament-wise. He and I and my husband and I, all just very low-key, very synced up. Second child comes out, and you guys think I'm kidding, but my husband and I really were convinced they messed up in the nursery, that this cannot be, we could not have produced this child. From day one, moving, grew, just constant movement, just out of the box kind of stuff, all right? We had to make adjustments with our responses to him. And so the second piece of temperament, even if you have that colicky baby, or that baby just truly temperament-wise is not like you, I have to have the capacity as a caregiver to respond, make those adjustments. people with mental health issues, substance abuse issues, family violence, teenage moms may have a difficult time doing that, okay? Now this is the big piece for the child welfare, folks. It's that separation of the infant from the caregiver. The system is designed to separate, if we separate children from their caregiver. That is going to impact attachment, especially if we're talking about once a week, 1 hour visitation. And so later on this afternoon, we're going to talk just about that. But we have to be fair within the system when we are talking about attachment. We have to be fair and make a consideration of the impact of that once a week visit or twice a week visit, however long it is. And then the last one, the working model of attachment. Go back to that very first slide that I had. Remember I said parents love their kids? And the second thing that I said is they don't know they're doing anything wrong until we come in and tell them they are. Their working model of attachment works for them. And so we've got to think about what is their working model of attachment, what is that generational cycle that they're bringing forward with them, and how are we using it when we're making those observations, when we're making those reports to the court, and when we're making those recommendations about permanency. In the literature, when we talk about attachment, there's 4 different categories or typologies, if you will. And if we could all start using the same language, I think it would be great. And I think it also will help the judges understand where we're coming from when we talk about attachment. A secure attachment is attachments where it's reciprocal, it's profound, emotional and physical needs are being met. It's a great thing. We want to make sure that the children that come into the system have at least one secure attachment, and that can be in a daycare setting, that can be in a foster care setting, and that can be with their caregivers. 80% of the children in child welfare are going to come into that avoidant or ambivalent or anxious piece, and that avoidant child is typically a little bit older, and that's going to be that child that's experienced abuse and neglect, but it's been in and out of the system. And every time they come in and out of the system, there's a new foster parent, a new relative, a new daycare, a new community, so that they just avoid it altogether at some point. The majority of kids that you're going to see is that ambivalent or anxious child, and that's that child that's just comes in and out. This week, gonna run to see mama. Mama's gonna run to see him. I mean, I know we don't really see this, but everybody's happy to see each other. Next week, he got picked up at the daycare when his best buddy's birthday party was getting ready to go on, and he's not real happy about just being picked up to go see mama. So what might happen at the visitation?
He doesn't want to be there.
He doesn't want to be there. He doesn't want to be there, and so it's going to be this adjustment time for him. And then the next piece is the disorganized, and this is typically the much older kids that cross all 3. These are the kids that are clinically depressed. They may have some anxiety, clingy, underachieving, and low motivation. When we talk about attunement, what attunement means, most of you will look at this picture and you will say that the dad is reading the child's cues, right? The dad sees the baby cry, I'm going to respond by crying. I'm attuned to that child. And that's all attunement is. I'm appropriately responding to the baby's cues. If I only see my baby once a week, how do I know to read cues? Mariana, can I use your example again of your sick baby? Mariana has a sick baby, all right, a baby that's not doing so great. Did have an ear infection? Had an ear infection, but took some antibiotics, had a reaction to the antibiotics. Let's pretend that Mariana is the foster home, all right? Today is the day. How long has this been going on, Mariana?
Like maybe a week.
Okay.
Ear infection and an allergy.
Okay, so last week we had a visit. Baby didn't have an ear infection, develops the ear infection. Foster mom's this great foster mom. She stayed up for 3 hours last night. Today's visitation. I don't know what kind of mood your baby's in, but I would suspect really tired, kind of cranky. If I don't cue in mom, if I don't tell mom that this is what's been going on, and I just sit there and watch thinking that she should know, how would she know? How will she read those cues? So we have a responsibility on the attunement piece that when we're doing those visitations, making sure that we're cueing in parents and caregivers to what could be going on that will impact that attachment piece. So when we talk about attachment and attunement, it goes way, way, way beyond the parents. Obviously, we know that we're removing kids from their parents. We're breaking that attachment. In some cases, just because of lack of resources, we are breaking the attachment to siblings. We may have to put kids in multiple homes. I understand that. So we're breaking that attachment. But how many of you really give thought to the rest of what I'm going to talk about? The relatives. A lot of the kids in this circuit, they've got a grandma, a grandpa, some aunties, some uncles that they are attached to. We remove them from that. They've got neighbors that they're attached to. I use myself as an example. I have 2 little girls that live next door. If they're out front when I get home, they're running over to the car, not to see me, but to ask me about my popsicles. Do I have, Miss Patty, do you have popsicles? All right? There's no doubt in my mind, because with a 4-year-old, we've been doing this drill for 4 years. If she's out, she's coming for a popsicle. I always have popsicles in the freezer. There is no doubt in my mind, if she was removed, at some point she would either say, "Where's Miss Patty?" or "Where's the popsicles?" There's no doubt in my mind. And then the last piece is the community piece. We remove kids from their community, but we don't give a lot of thought to especially young kids making a connection to community. I'll use a real live example. Out 87, for those of you that are familiar with Milton, out toward Whiting Field. 87 is a really long road for those of you that are not familiar. We got a referral. It was a brand new foster home, married couple, young married couple, first placement. They get a 2.5-year-old. They are great foster parents. They take the first week off of work. They tag team so that the child can make that adjustment the first week. Actually, minimal issues, all right? The next week, they have to go back to work. They put the baby in the car. They're driving up 87. Out of the blue, the kid freaks out. Screaming, carrying on, kicking the back of the seat. She drives into Milton proper. She gets to the daycare situation. She's got to calm him down. He has relatively good days. She works. She comes back in the afternoon, picks him up, puts him in the seat, starts driving back down 87. He starts freaking out again. He's doing the kicking, the screaming, the hitting. This goes on for 2 weeks. She calls and says, maybe we weren't meant to be young baby foster parents. We get a referral, and I take the referral. I go out there, and because of just my thought process is something's wrong in the foster home, something's wrong in the daycare. Maybe there really are some sensory issues. So I go to the foster home, I do the observation in the foster home, everything looks good. Go to the daycare, do an observation of the daycare, everything looks good, and then I'm thinking, maybe she's just exaggerating. So I'm there in the morning when she drops off. I see what she's talking about. She's telling the truth. I go and do an afternoon visit when they get home from work. She's telling the truth, and I am stumped. I really am stumped. About 2 weeks later, I talk with the mom. As I'm talking to her, I realized they live off of 87. So I started asking her about day-to-day routines. Well, every day, they would walk over to the Tom Thumb, and she would buy him a bag of cheese balls and a can of Mellow Yellow. Now, we're all going awful with the Mellow Yellow. What was my intervention? We didn't even have to stop at Tom Thumb. All she did was, I said no Mellow Yellow. All she did was buy a big bag of cheese balls every morning, put them in a Ziploc bag, chuck them back there, and he was happy with his cheese balls, kind of thing. A 2-day intervention that took me almost a month to figure out this is what's going on. So kids, very, very young, make a connection to their community, and we break that. We break that. And then this picture has raised all kind of havoc as I've been training. Please don't walk away with Patty Babcock said we should be taking pets out of the home too, all right? That's not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is that there are children who have a very strong attachment to their pets as well. that they may be sleeping at night with their dogs, their cats. That may be their go-to place to escape. What are we doing if we have an opportunity? If you have an opportunity, what are you doing to maybe on a visitation, somebody we visit with that dog, that cat, and if you can't do it, can someone just take a picture of the dog or cat for that child to have? And let's make sure that we make those connections. We talk a lot about the life book. This is their life. This is their life here. So when we break attachments, it goes way, way beyond the parents. And so what are the factors that are going to influence attachment? And we go back to that working model of attachment. We know that almost 60% of abusive parents were abused as kids. That's their working model of attachment. And what we also know is that that maltreatment that occurs in the first 5 years of life is related to psychological and behavioral issues 12 years later. What we know is every day when you guys work in the environment that you work in, all those factors that you see on a day-to-day basis impact that working model of attachment. And we also know that the more severe the childhood abuse, the more severe the abuse is going to be today. And then we've got that overlay of poverty. And when I'm talking about poverty, I am not talking about day 12 of your 15-day pay period and you're wondering about how you're going to get to day 15. I'm talking about true poverty, where every day is a struggle to think about food, shelter, clothing. Unfortunately, a lot of the folks that we deal with in that poverty situation have an overlay, if you will, of mental health issues or even substance abuse issue and family violence too. But what we know is that there's not a whole lot of communication with that baby. I don't agree with what the research says, and this is just my own personal experience. I don't have data to support it. The research says that the young child has a little opportunity to kind of explore their environment. My experience has been they're given all kinds of opportunity. There's no parent there to oversee it, that they're coming and going and doing what they like once they start to get mobile. And so what we know about early experience, just poverty and brain development, we know that if our needs are being met, we've got this brain that's developed. We know if our needs are not being met, we feel unsafe, insecure, and powerless. In the beginning, we're going to spend a whole lot of energy trying to get what we need, and then we're just going to shut down, and then the brain is just not going to make those connections that they should be making. When we talk about stress, young children are stressed out, and we call it environmental deprivation for young children. And we can get deprived from that separation from a caregiver, and that can be the physical separation, and it can be the emotional separation, and it can be a separation that's caused primarily by unstable relationships, and those are those teen parents, the family violence piece, the substance abuse, and then depression and any other kind of maternal health issues. We're going to start out looking at family violence. I'm getting ready to show, it's about a 10-minute video. It's a 2020, it was a 25-minute video, so I have cut it down quite a bit. There are some curse words in there, and it's pretty violent. You will see actual violence. It's not a reenactment. And so as you're watching this video, I want you to think about what would it be like to bring a baby home to this family? And what would it be like to be a 3 or a 5-year-old who's already in this family and this is what they're experiencing?
It is not always easy to watch, but this is the reality of an epidemic of domestic abuse that takes place in all races, all regions, and all across economic lines in this country. In fact, while you're watching this program, there will be an estimated 250 assaults on women in America. In a nice neighborhood in upstate New York, in a nice house like the ones you know, behind closed doors, a father commands his 13-year-old son to pick up a camera and start recording.
Look at me. You play those stupid games with me, I'll knock your teeth out of your face.
The father delivers a verbal flogging to the mother in front of their children.
You act like a in front of the kids.
It will go on for nearly an hour.
You little slut.
If I see a dog, I won't stop. I won't stop.
It is domestic abuse, the kind we hear about but often don't believe.
I don't want to see your stupid crooked self. Stupid ass heifer.
Susan is 42 years old. They have 3 children. The father, Ulner, directs his 13-year-old son, the cameraman, to get a close-up of their emotionally battered mother.
Zoom in. Do you see a tear?
No.
Not a tear out of that face.
Yep, I got that.
He indicates he wants the tape to prove that his anger at his wife is justified. What prompts his tirade? Susan asks him if he'd like some lunch.
Come over here with this stupid
Yeah.
and stir it up. No, you didn't leave. You didn't just come ask me about lunch.
He even makes his 13-year-old son join him in blaming her.
And you enjoy getting your ass broke because that's obvious. Yes, you do.
Because you know it provokes it, and you do it anyway.
You do it anyway.
And if you're wondering what kind of woman would endure something like this, if you're certain she's nothing like you, well, take a look at Susan on tape 3 years ago, and look at the woman she really is today.
What do you see when you look at her?
A woman desperately trying to save whatever she can salvage of her family, desperately trying to please her husband and do whatever it is that he wants her to do.
According to a Department of Justice survey, 1 in 4 American women experience domestic violence. For Susan, the story begins when she is 18 years old, the daughter of a black father, a white mother, who falls in love with a 26-year-old guitarist in a popular local band. He is talented, charismatic. His name is Ulner.
I would go to see him play on the weekends, and we'd talk on the phone, and we just sort of grew to know each other.
Did you say to yourself, I'm happy?
Absolutely.
They got married. He worked as a musician, she with a health insurance company. And they had their 3 children. We're covering their faces at her request.
Everyone looks at you, and I know the first thing they would think is, so beautiful, so intelligent. You must have been able to take care of yourself in any situation.
I was shy. I was very green. You know, my world was absolutely inside of the walls of our home.
She says at first her husband was just very demanding and controlling, not so different from her own father, whom she described as overbearing. But she says the more she tried to comply with her husband's demands, the more obsessive his control.
Did you have friends over for dinner?
Never, never. He never wanted friends over. He never wanted men in his house in particular.
And your father and stepfather didn't know about this?
My husband had cut me off from my father and family for many years.
How you gonna say something stupid like that?
And you can hear on the videotape how his badgering, his criticism wore her down by twisting her words.
When I was watching my son do something, and he said, "Don't look at him like you're interested in what he's doing." And I said, "I think I am interested in what my children do."
I think I'm interested in my children.
And he turned that into, "I think I'm interested in what my children do."
So you can think you care about your children, whatever you want to think you care about. You don't.
And then he turned it into, "I think I love my children." All in the same conversation. That phrase turned into something totally different.
In that 51-minute tape, Ulner calls Susan stupid 36 times.
And just you standing there talking stupid like this, me off. Because you used to be on your knees apologizing to you stupid effer.
The rants.
Yes, the mental and verbal abuse, just hours. I mean, he would call it a family meeting. And these family meetings were all about what mommy did wrong today. He totally had my children completely on his side, completely brainwashed. Not only could I not believe his behavior, but I couldn't believe my own children's behavior.
She says the verbal abuse had gone on for years before the words became fists. She says the first time he hit her, it was because she forgot something he wanted at a nearby grocery store. Her oldest child, her daughter, was 19.
He beat me down to the floor. I was crawling on the floor trying to get away. I remember my daughter turning on the vacuum cleaner so that my younger children couldn't hear it.
You know more of what's going on at work than in your own house.
At the time of the tape, she was working, he was not. He was jealous of men on the outside.
And this got to do with somebody at work.
It does not. I don't have anyone.
Heifer lie.
I can't tell you how many baseball coaches I was accused of, swimming teachers, karate teacher, other parents, anything.
Video this line.
But her greatest agony was the role of her children.
When you think your son was on the other side of that lens.
Not only that, my younger son was right there also.
He was in the room.
Their youngest son, 8 years old. Coming up toward the end of the tape, Ulner explodes in violence.
You were sorry you wouldn't come up here. Wouldn't do that. You know, you would have left if you came up. Ask me that again.
And so what does the son do? And what about the question everyone wants to know? Why on earth didn't she just leave?
Follow what I say to the T. Sit your stupid ass.
June 22, 2003, terrifying images of physical abuse. The kind the experts say takes place every 15 seconds someplace in this country. The difference is, this is caught on video.
You don't know what to do. Look at your stupid ass. Look at the way you look.
Behind the camera, a 13-year-old boy watching his mother slapped, slugged, and throttled by his father.
You keep playing the game with me, I'm gonna knock your head across that wall.
At one point, for nearly 3 minutes, the son seems...
To the T.
The terrified mother, Susan, covers her face, while the father, Ulner, strangles her, throws her to the floor.
You have a stupid nerve about your stupid self, and you don't learn after I beat you on the turn. You do not learn.
When you look back, are you amazed you didn't crack?
Was the thought of my children.
And impossible as it is to believe, as this was going on, she still managed to care for the children, the house, and work in a part-time job. Her boss was Lynn Jasper, who started picking up on something unsettling. The way she heard Susan talk to her husband on the phone at the end of the day.
I'm calling you now to tell you that I'm leaving so you can clock the time that it takes me to get home. And if I vary from that course, what punishment am I going to have to suffer when I get there?
And a phrase Susan uses on the phone horrifies Lynn.
And when I called, I had to call him master.
Yes, master. No, master. And you hear it the first couple times and you think, wow, what a sick individual.
You're going to work and functioning in the workplace and then coming back to this prison.
Yes. I think that any independent, strong-willed woman would be quick to say, and I'll admit I was one of them, why doesn't she just leave? Why would you take that?
Again, it's the question everyone asks and cannot understand people.
And I know what that question is. Why didn't you just leave?
Why didn't you leave?
A lot of it is preservation of family. I didn't want to see my family destroyed. And in my eyes, because of what he was telling me, I was the problem. So all I had to do was fix me.
On average, it will take 7 tries for a woman to leave her abuser. The psychological chains as strong as any metal.
He had literally, physically and mentally beat me down to nothing. I thought I was not as good as a piece of dirt on his shoe. And that's a place that is hard to come out of.
May 6, 2003, back at the office, Lynn notices that Susan has a wound on her head.
I asked her, I said, what happened to your head?
And I said, oh, I was pulling a box off the shelf in the closet and the corner of the box fell and hit me in the eye.
But Lynn makes note of the day on her calendar, and she continues to take notes for herself when she sees something worrying. On May 20th, 2003, Lynn notices that Susan arrives late to work.
She tucked her hair behind her ear, and her whole ear was bruised. And then it occurred to me that, dear God, it's not that she's ignoring me. She probably can't hear me.
Her husband had ruptured her eardrum with the back of his hand. It seems she had broken one of her husband's new rules, forbidding her to hug and kiss her own children. Just 3 days later, another set of bruises, including on the face and back of her hands, recorded by Lynn in her calendar.
I came in very, very upset. I couldn't contain it.
She started to cry, and we had gone into a room privately, and I'd closed the blinds.
And she said, okay, Susan, what's going on? And I need you to know that I'm here for you.
She told me a lot of what was going on, but you know what? not even close to the whole story.
And then I begged her not to tell anyone. Begged her. Because I didn't want my husband to get in trouble.
So much was happening inside that house. He had kicked her with his sneakers, beat her with a hardcover book, struck her repeatedly with a belt. And finally, Susan became so terrified, she slipped a letter into Lynn's desk drawer.
I opened one of the lower drawers of my desk, and there was an envelope in there. It had my name on it. And I remember reading it and just getting physically just sick, like, to the point where it actually made me throw up.
The letter was for her children, in case she died.
The letter that Susan wrote to her boys was just her whole heart on a piece of paper. And there was no mistaking the fact that she knew that he was not at all beyond killing her.
You do think he would have killed you?
I know he would have. I know he would have.
Then, a month later, the videotaped episode of June 22nd that changed everything for Susan.
Get your off that floor and sit up, stand up.
And when I looked in his eyes, my husband wasn't there anymore. His eyes were empty.
You gonna sit up there and tell me you don't know what to do? No, wait a minute, you gonna tell me?
Through what would be her long final night at home, Susan planned her escape.
I got up and piled on makeup, hoping that he wouldn't look at me too hard because my face was very battered. And I dropped my older son off at school, and I went to work.
When Susan walked in on the last day, she was beaten and marked worse than I had seen. And I remember saying to her, it's gotta stop. It ends here.
I looked at her and I said, today's the day. Once I said to Lynn, that was it, she said, okay, I'm calling. And went and did it immediately.
With the help of police over the next few hours, she ran a heart-pounding race against the clock. Since her husband patrolled every minute of her day, she had to get to the children before he did, and before he made an irrational move.
And I knew that my husband was going to be looking for me.
First, she raced to pick up her youngest son at elementary school and took him to the police station. The police picked up her older boy. But Susan's phone had been ringing and ringing. Officer Kathy Onions.
We decided to have Susan call the residence and speak to her husband to reassure him that she picked up the son as she was instructed to. We wanted to document what his response was to this conversation and, and have it on a tape.
Hello, honey.
Where are you?
I'm afraid to come home. I'm afraid to come home.
You stupid heifer. What you mean you're afraid to come home? You better bring son home. If you don't bring my son home, I'm gonna kill you, heifer.
I don't want you to hurt me.
What?
I'm afraid to come home.
At another point, Ulner talked directly to Officer Onions.
He told me that he controls them, that he tells them what to do, they're his property, and he can tell me to release them. And I explained to him that that's not how it works.
Off that floor and sit up, stand up.
But domestic abuse cases are notoriously difficult. It would be his word against hers. And what would the children say, including her daughter, who wanted to stay with her dad? The question loomed, would Ulner be free to come after Susan again? Coming up, the courtroom showdown that would change history for abused women.
As a prosecutor, this was perhaps the most cocky and arrogant individual as a defendant. He was convinced that he could control his world and the world at large. He was convinced he could control me, the judge, and the jury.
And Sawyer.
After years of physical and emotional abuse, a woman takes her 2 sons to a shelter for battered women. Her daughter remains with the abusive husband. Susan returned with us to the place that had been her first sanctuary.
I remember the relief of knowing nobody was going to berate me today. Nobody's going to hit me today. Oh, wow. I remember.
But as we said, domestic abuse is notoriously hard to prosecute. It's his word against hers. But a week after Susan's escape, when police officers were interviewing her, she casually dropped a bombshell. Again, Officer Kathy Onions and Officer Cindy Herberger.
Excuse me, did you say a videotape? And she goes, oh, yes. My older son was made to videotape this whole assault. I said, you've got to be kidding me.
And I just looked over at Kathy, and my eyes went big, and her eyes went big at me.
You don't know what to do. You follow me to the T. You follow what I say to the T.
But if you think having that video alone would seal an abuser's fate, you are wrong.
What would he be convicted of if there were only that tape?
Class A misdemeanor.
That's all.
Maximum jail time 1 year, which in reality is 9 months.
This is inconceivable. When you see it and you say, that's all the law considers this to be a misdemeanor?
You don't have serious physical injury. She has bruises, she has bumps.
Get your off that floor and sit up.
So based on the tape alone, Ulner could have been out in less than a year. And he also insisted that the rest of the time the family had been happy. John O'Donnell was presiding judge in the case.
He continued to say that they were the Cosby family.
When the prosecution offered Ulner a deal of 4 years to protect the children from a trial,
he absolutely rejected that sentence in a heartbeat.
Prosecutor Lisa Rodwin.
And he said, no one will believe her, the children won't testify against me, I will win.
What Ulner apparently did not realize was that his wife had that guardian angel with a calendar. In the end, those notes would help prosecutors charge him with 12 separate vicious assaults against his wife.
This was a vital piece of physical evidence for the jury to see that somebody else could verify what happened, that she was hurt, that she saw bruises, and these are the dates.
Susan's children are called to testify. Her eldest son is still a reluctant witness, but he does tell the jury that his father whipped his mother with a belt. And the younger son, the little one.
For him to talk about Dad hitting Mom was emotionally wrenching. He started sobbing uncontrollably on the stand.
But the eldest, the daughter, will stand by her father and testify that she never witnessed a single incident of abuse. In the end, Ulner is found guilty on all counts. The judge, who will never forget that searing tape, hands down a sentence of 36 years.
The videotape is it's terrible. And as you can see, it still gets to me.
According to the prosecutor, the sentence would be the longest in New York history for a domestic violence case in which the victim managed to stay alive.
People say you get murder convictions that don't have that kind of sentence.
What the judge said at sentencing was, you have destroyed this family as much, if not more, than if you had committed a murder.
It was an unusual case, and it required some unusual punishment.
So 36 years is...
To see somebody that you once loved go to prison for 36 years, even after everything he did to me, it wasn't something that made me happy.
3 years later, Susan and her children are still trying to regain their lives. The youngest doing well. The oldest child, her daughter, who spent the most years under Ulner's control, is having the toughest time.
Are you estranged from her now?
She's okay. She's working very hard at being okay.
And what about the son who made that videotape? He and his mother are together.
Does your older son understand how he was used and manipulated now?
Yes, he does.
No forgiveness is needed.
Oh, absolutely. From the start, my children knew that. You know, I could never hold them responsible for what happened there.
You ain't sorry about nothing. Shut up.
And her son's tape has now become a potent weapon against abuse. Susan now uses it at police academies to put a personal face on an epidemic.
Remember that if you go to somebody's door, that woman's going to tell you, no, officer, no problem. She'll hug her abuser, smile at him. Because she knows when you leave, if she doesn't say the right thing, she's going to get it. She's going to get it.
If someone you know is struggling with abuse at home, there is help out there. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available day and night at 1-800-799-SAFE, 799-SAFE. We've also put a list of other contacts on 2020's webpage at abcnews.com.
and we hope you'll use it. We'll be right back.
Go back to what I said, the very first slide that we have, that this is all that the children know. This becomes normalized for some families, and we talk about family culture. A culture of violence is just part of what families live. And so on this case, the 19-year-old girl that they were talking about, she never sides with the mom. Even after the video is produced, she still sides with the dad. And I don't know if you heard on there, you know, talking about the family culture piece, I don't know if you heard that we would have family meetings where we would discuss what was wrong with mom. And so if you are a child who, that 3 to 5-year-old child, whether you're actively involved in the family meeting, if you saw a meeting at your house where the 19-year-old is sitting down and the 13-year-old is sitting down, mommy and daddy are sitting down, and we're all talking about all the things that mommy did wrong, what's the learned behavior there? And so that's the piece with family violence, and how do we change kind of that culture, if you will. And where you guys come into play is thinking about the myths, and especially very young children. And so myth number 1 is young children don't remember traumatic experiences if they occurred early in life. Since they can't remember or talk about trauma, it won't affect them. We use the word resilience, that the kids are resilient, they'll bounce back. And kind of what I talk to you all about is, what are they bouncing back to? They don't have a good baseline unless we put some really good interventions in place. And what the research shows is, the fact is that kids do remember this, even when it does happen early on in life, that after about 28 months, they'll have verbal recall, and under the 28-month mark that you'll see it in play and drama and reenactments. And very quickly I'll tell you about Judge Marcy Goodman. For whatever reason, when she was on the dependency side several years ago, she would refer people to me for family. I was in true private practice, so the family violence folks would come to me, and I had a family of 3, and the youngest boy was a little bit over 3 years old. And so I had him come in, and I'm doing play therapy with, and I'm trying really hard to just kind of set the scenario that there's a mom, a dad, and then the 3 kids. So I had one of those big Barbie cars, those big Barbie sedan things that I used in play. And I'm handing the dolls to him, just simulating the family. And I swear, he's saying this: get your ass in the car, get your ass in the car, with each kid. And he's shoving each doll into the car. There's no doubt in my mind that he had witnessed it. So I said to him, I said, where'd you hear that? And that's just how I say it to him. And he said, my dad. And so this is the start of, you could see the aggression already, and just the start of that pattern of behavior, that play piece, if you will. The next myth, and we do this all the time, even with adults, it's better to forget the bad things that have happened and instead concentrate on the good things that are happening. Hey, don't worry about it, you're safe here. We're never going to go back to that. That's what we tell kids, when the fact is that if they're discouraged from talking about the trauma, they often become preoccupied and feel alone with their own worries. We have to make sure that they have some kind of outlet, just like the kids in the sexual abuse side, some kind of outlet, some kind of treatment, some kind of place to go where they can talk about what they're feeling. If a child refuses to talk or be responsive, he is just being stubborn, when in fact that's not true at all. They're just overwhelmed by their own experiences. And we typically see this with kids, that it's a new behavior in the family. So mom is plugging along just fine, the family's pretty functional, if you will. Mom gets a new boyfriend, and the verbal piece starts, and then it escalates to this. Think about it for you guys as adults. How hard would it be as an adult how hard was it for you to wrap your head around what you saw? Kids just don't even know how to even talk about it. They're afraid for themselves, they're afraid for their mom. Traumatized children will always appear timid and fragile and are easily managed. We're going to spend a whole lot of time on that. You guys know that's not true. They actually can be more aggressive, more volatile, and they can have flashbacks, just like adults with PTSD. If a child is acting out in a hurtful way, he or she is being willful and can choose to stop the bad behavior, when in fact the fact is children have been traumatized, often identified with those who have traumatized them. kind of do on the others. It's that learned behavior piece. It's the social learning theory. So where I'm going with all this is young age does not act as a buffer to the impact of violence on children. Infants and toddlers can be negatively impacted, and then go back to that development piece. What's going to be going on with all the sensory integration piece, the development piece, and the brain piece if we have this going on in the family? So when we talk about prevalence, we talk about the stats, and now I'm tying it back together about that first week of life being the most dangerous for the child. What we know is 25 to 45% of battered women are actually battered during their pregnancy. So you better believe that they're being battered during pregnancy. That's not going to go away just because that new baby's coming in. And in fact, we've added a new stressor. 3 to 10 million children will witness domestic violence this year. The majority of them will see it multiple times. And then this is the one that I really like. Over a third of children in one study reported seeing violence used by their fathers against their mothers when a parent reported the domestic violence did not occur. So those of you that have had a domestic violence class, you know that that's part of the issue. It's the secrecy of family violence, if you will. You will get in your, you'll get an email with the actual presentation in it, and I put these 2 domestic violence wheels in there. I don't expect you to use it, but those of you that are working with families where there's family violence, if you're having a hard time getting the victim to come forward or the victim to really acknowledge that it is violence, I would suggest you use the wheel as talking points, and you're asking them questions directly off the wheel. For those of you that are working with military families, there is actually now a domestic violence wheel for military families where they have factored in such things as using the ID card, base access. The military wheel is actually really good because it almost gives you questions to ask and places to go as you're having these discussions with the victims. So what are you going to see? Go back to that developmental piece that we talked about this morning. On the infants and toddlers, the really young kids, you potentially could see excessive irritability, some immature behavior. When does the majority of family violence occur? What time of day?
At night.
At night. In the evening and at night. And so with the really young kids, you may see some sleep disturbances because how difficult would it be to go to sleep in that family that we just saw, knowing that something may be happening to mommy. Obviously, you're going to see some emotional distress and some fears of being alone. The regression in toileting and language, all right? Remember, go back to that very first slide that most of this is normal. Most kids will hit that milestone, the toileting and language milestone. They may be a little bit delayed. Where you see the regression is when there's an escalation in violence, so maybe it's gone from verbal to physical violence, so there's an escalation, and or it's a brand new behavior introduced. And so that's the regression piece. They're responding to what has happened to them. And then when we look at the older kids, the 3 to 5-year-olds, you're going to see a higher level of aggression, higher level of anger, hostility, fear. And then you also may see that anxiety or withdrawal and even depression. And these are the kids that I can't even put my arms around that and go back to the cognitive development, how I perceive the world. So cognitively, I've made a shift, and I can't deal with it. Very quickly, I'm going to talk about substance abuse and infant mental health. And this is the framework that we start from, that substance abusing parents can be good parents when they're not using. We can't make the assumption that just because they use drugs, they are not capable of being a good parent. The other piece that we really need to understand is that prenatal exposure can lead to postnatal problems. The prenatal exposure in the first trimester, even if mama got off the drugs, may mean that there's some postnatal problems, and then obviously that third trimester piece as well. So what we really need to acknowledge, going back to the attachment and attunement piece, that baby's temperament is going to be a little bit different because of the prenatal exposure, and just caring for a child can be challenging. There may or may not be attachment issues. And then in terms of the mental and developmental issues, these babies really have a difficult time organizing behavior. Their schedules are going to be really off. They're going to be more irritable. They may have sleep issues. They may have central nervous system issues. And then down the road, they may have language development issues. And what's so important for everybody in the room, when we think about interventions, We've got to make sure that we get that substance abuse treatment for the parent, but what are we doing, whether it's for the foster parents or the biological parents or both, or even a daycare situation, what are we doing to intervene on those relationships and help the relationships because of all the behaviors that were related to prenatal exposure? With the visitation piece, and I don't know the answer to this, how many are you scan via FFN or DCF? What's the rule on visitation for positive UAs, if any? Are we waiting 30 days still for clean UAs before we have visitation?
I don't think it's 30 days necessarily. I think it's just a clean UA.
Okay.
So, I mean, even if they, but the problem is that UAs typically only occur once a month.
Right, and that's where I'm going with all this, that if your UAs are only once a month, or you have a heavy THC user who might take 30 days, a heavy marijuana user might take 30 days for it to get out of my system. Go back to the attachment and the attunement piece. We're doing a disservice to the parents and to the child, because 30 days for a newborn or for any childbirth to 5 can be an incredibly long time developmentally. So on that visitation piece, if we can, and I don't know if it means that we need to educate the judges or what we need to do, but on that visitation piece, if we can look for behavioral impairment. We obviously want a quality visitation piece. We don't want to do quantity. So if there's behavioral impairment, sure, we don't want to do the visitation. But if they're not behaviorally impaired, we want to push for visitation at a minimum on a weekly basis. And that goes back to the attachment and the attunement piece. And then the last thing I think is so critical, we have got to make sure that foster parents who are getting these kids who are prenatally exposed, that they have the appropriate training to deal with these kids. And then I really need to add the ELC piece, the early learning piece as well. When we look at caregiver mental illness, take that same picture that I used for attunement. Is it possible that children are responding to mentally ill parents? That it's the opposite of attunement? And just for the record, this is my brother-in-law and this is my niece. She has colic, so he's not mentally ill, kind of thing. I always tell them I do that as a disclaimer. So on the infant mental health piece, how is it related to caregiver mental health? Well, we've got 1 in 5 families that's affected by serious mental illness. And remember, I'm not talking just about the maternal side. It can be the paternal side as well. And in some families, it's maternal and paternal. And the infants and toddlers are caught up in this. And that primary relationship, whoever the primary caregiver is, that's going to impact where the child is developmentally. Very, very quickly, I'm going to talk about depression, postpartum depression, schizophrenia, and dual diagnosis. When we talk about depression and the prevalence of depression, what we know is about 15 to 25% of the overall population has the symptoms for clinical depression. The other side, or the downside of that, is only 25% go to get clinical help. So we have 75% of folks out there who are not treated. It's going to occur more often in women than it does in men, and this is very important for those of you who are working in the field. If I'm pregnant and I have no history of depression, I have the same risk of depression as any other woman out there. Okay, if you haven't been diagnosed with depression, pregnancy does not make you more depressed, all right, theoretically. The catch with that is, if I had depression before I was pregnant, I am at a much higher risk for postpartum depression and a much higher risk for psychoses with that postpartum depression. So we need to make sure that we are looking at the moms who are pregnant, who had depression before they got pregnant, and then making sure that Healthy Start, Healthy Families, Families Count, is somebody is in there very quickly after that child is delivered. And so what are the factors that may impact the whole depression piece? Obviously, you guys know there's situational or psychosocial events. We may have some brain structure and function issues, and then with the postpartum depression, we have hormones. For those of you that are not clinical, which is the majority of the room, we typically look at 4 areas when we're talking about depression. We look at work, sleep, eat, and then just enjoyment, that pleasurable activities piece. And then we look at the frequency. Episodes can occur once, twice, or several times in a lifetime. When those of you that are comp assessors or are writing assessments or that are clinical, if you have depression for more than 2 years, you're actually diagnosed with dysthymia. And the reason that I bring this up is we have folks in the child welfare system who have been diagnosed since teenage years. And what you guys need to know is obviously this is a long-term piece. Their chronic symptoms, their symptoms are going to be less severe, but this is what's so important. They're unable to function at full ability. That could be a debilitating illness, if you will, if they've had it for longer than 2 years. Bipolar, all I'm going to say about bipolar, all of you know that it's manic depressive and that there's mania, if you will, or elation, and then depression, that down mood. And what I want everybody to understand that bipolar is not this rhythmic, I'm up, I'm down. It can be primarily mania, where I am up, 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 up. I bottom out, I come back up, I'm up, 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 I bottom out. Or it could be primarily depressed. I'm down, I'm down, I'm down. Boom, I'm up, I'm back down. You guys get it. I think there is a misconception that we've got this very predictable rhythm. There's no predictability with it. I'm going to go really quick. Think about a baby, a birth to 5-year-old child, and these are all the behavioral symptoms that are going on, the physical and behavioral symptoms. I'm not sleeping right. I've got insomnia or I'm oversleeping, waking up much earlier than usual. I've got some changes in my appetite. I may be eating more or less. I've got decreased energy, fatigue. I've got some headaches, stomach aches, digestive issues, those psychosomatic issues. I've kind of lost interest in the things that I like to do. I'm not doing the hobbies I like to do. I'm not having intimate relationships the way I used to. I've got difficult concentrating and remembering. I'm neglecting my own responsibilities, not keeping up my personal appearance. I'm persistently sad or have this empty mood. I've just been crying for no reason. I feel hopeless, helpless, guilty, worthless. I'm irritable. I could be irritable, agitated or anxious, and then worst case scenario, I've got some thoughts of death or suicide or even homicide. How's it working for the baby? How's it working for attachment? It's not, and it's just, forget the child welfare piece, we just have a mental health overlay. What most people think is that if I'm depressed, I'm laying on the couch all the time. And they don't give a whole lot of thought, and I'm only talking right now about the folks with young children. They don't give a whole lot of thought to folks are laying on the couch a whole lot, but are they really sleeping? No, most of them, there's a sleep deprivation piece. And so I start out with all these mood issues, all these physical symptoms. Maybe, maybe not. I have some anxiety and guilt, and I may not have anxiety and guilt about my child, but maybe my husband, my paramour, they're ticked off because I'm not engaged with them. We're not having sex. We're not going out and doing the things we're supposed to be doing. I have anxiety and guilt. I have sleep deprivation again. I'm not getting all the sleep that I need, and it's not restful sleep. What happens to my symptoms? Those of you that have worked nights or sleep deprived, your symptoms increase. And it's just this vicious cycle. We do a great job in child welfare asking about the baby's sleep cycle. How many of you routinely ask about the parent's sleep cycle? And asking especially those moms that you're involved with, what is your sleep cycle? And are you getting enough sleep? And if you're not, what is some kind of respite care that we can get in place for you, or can we get you into mental health so that maybe you could get some medication? So obviously, what's the impact on infant mental health or the social emotional piece? Remember, go back to that attachment piece. If I don't have the capacity to respond to you because I've got all this other stuff going on, there's going to be attachment and attunement issues. It's not going to be reciprocal, and it's not going to be cyclical. When we look at the science of it, so once again, if you don't buy all the fluff stuff, you don't buy that you're going to have negative and disengaged parenting behaviors, or you don't buy that the kids are going to be more likely to experience psychiatric or behavioral issues, or you don't buy the attachment piece, we have science again. Children with just depressed parents, there's no abuse, there's no neglect. They have a higher cortisol level. Cortisol is your stress hormone. They have a higher cortisol level. They also have different EEG readings in the lobes of their brain, just from the depression piece. And then the last thing is, if I'm pregnant and I'm depressed and I deliver a baby, 6 months later, I'm still going to have a higher cortisol level than the non-depressed mom. So there's biological changes that happen just from your mother being depressed. And this is the next piece that we're missing. Depressed mothers and fathers engage in less positive interaction with their children. We now have 2 studies. It's been duplicated. We all know about postpartum depression and women, and we all assume that it's hormonal. Well, what they've done, I think it's out of UMass and Harvard, they've duplicated the study, is they have taken the same criteria for postpartum depression on the Edinburgh postpartum depression screen, and they've applied it to new dads. Well, guess what? 14% of moms meet criteria, 10% of dads. 1 out of 10 meet depression screen. We don't screen fathers for postpartum depression, and we need to start thinking about, are we doing it? So we did all that. So this is, once again, this is a what's called a still face experiment, and this will illustrate to you how quickly children change their response to, remember that reciprocal piece? It's reciprocal. Watch the attunement and the attachment piece here. As they video, they're going to ask a mom to just shut down, and she's going to be depressed.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby, who's about 1 year of age.
I'm like a girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this, and then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, come on, why aren't we doing this? Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it, they actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly situation.
And so that's kind of the illustration about depression, and we've got to make sure what are we doing to treat the depression and treat the relationship as well. I added the schizophrenia piece, and I don't know what's going on in Escambia County, but we've been doing infant mental health, I would guess, for 4 or 5 years in the circuit, and have had 0 referrals with a parent that has schizophrenia. And starting last year, we've now had 6, which is kind of, I can't explain it. I don't know what's going on here. But when you look at the overall prevalence, it's only 1% of the population. And men are typically diagnosed in their early 20s, late teens, early 20s, and the women are diagnosed in their mid-20s and early 30s. Seldom is it after 45, and then the hard piece is that adolescence piece. You won't see a whole lot of adolescents who are diagnosed with schizophrenia, and it's because they're doing all the adolescent stuff that they're supposed to be doing developmentally. So it's hard to differentiate between, is this normal adolescent development or is this true schizophrenia? The walk away that I want you guys to kind of walk away with is understanding that there is a very big link to schizophrenia and substance abuse. And then when you add that paranoid schizophrenic, that paranoid overlay or that diagnosis, that we have a higher incidence of violence, and it's going to occur in the home with their families. And so what are we doing to safeguard these really young children, especially the nonverbal kids? And kind of like you just saw with the depression piece, what you're going to see is initially kids are using a whole lot of energy to get that parent's attention. And if they have older kids, the older kids are going to be put into parental roles. And then go back to that trust piece. If I have a parent who is not at all predictable, I'm just going to shut down and not really keep going to them. They're not going to be my go-to person. And then the other piece with the schizophrenic piece is they're medication non-compliant. So they're going to be taking a lot of trips to the hospital, or they're just going to take off. So what you're going to see in terms of relationships, you're going to see that there's boundary issues. They have a very difficult time saying no. They're unpredictable. You also are going to see loyalty issues, and this is, forget the birth to 5 piece. This is for all the kids that are in the child welfare system. When the parent is paranoid schizophrenic, they will view or can view the kids as part of the system because we've removed them from them. Now they've become part of the system, and so we really have to safeguard kids during visitation and make sure that there is somebody there who is not going to do further damage. The parent is not going to do further damage, if you will, by insinuating that the child is part of the system, and there's some paranoia over that. And the kid, what I'm saying is the child is not one of the bad guys. Obviously, you're going to have social skill issues, life skill issues, the depression, anger management, and stress management, and then some attachment issues with parents that are schizophrenic. And then the dual diagnosis piece. And all I want to talk about with this piece is that dual diagnosis is a co-occurrence of a mental illness with a substance abuse or an alcohol piece, and then it's going to overlay, even for those of you that are clinicians, even that axis 2 piece, the personality disorder. And when we look at the prevalence, roughly 50% of individuals with severe mental disorders are affected by substance abuse. 37% of alcohol abusers and 53% of drug abusers also have at least one serious mental illness. And so there's that overlay of both, and the question is, what do I treat first, or do I treat them together? The other piece with this, when you guys are working with parents who are dual diagnosed, whether it's on an axis 1 or an axis 2, is there's a greater propensity for violence. There is a greater propensity for medication non-compliance, that they're not taking their medication for their mental health issue because they're self-medicating on the other side of their substance abuse or alcohol issue. Then the last thing is there's that downward drift, that the more I am involved with a substance abuse or alcohol issue and I have that mental health overlay, the lower my socioeconomic status is and the higher the likelihood that I'm going to become homeless and or committing criminal activity. So what do we do with these kids? And the reason I put this in there, there's a big gap in the research. The gap in the research is that we look at what's going on with the parents, but we don't look at the families, and we don't look at the safety factors, if you will, long term with these kids. And so my question that I pose is, are we really putting children at a greater biopsychosocial risk because their parents have a substance abuse and a mental health issue, and we don't really know what the long-term outcomes are? If we know, we can take kind of a leap of faith, if you will. If we know that just substance abusing women are less likely to seek pre- and postnatal care for themselves, can we make the leap if they're not doing it for themselves, they're probably not going to do it for their kids? We also know that with the dual diagnosis folks, they're less likely to seek assistance in a child care situation. Why? Not the financial piece. Why? That I make myself visible and I make the children visible, and that's a risk for me. And then that poor access to services, and it could be because they're not visible in the community, and their community sometimes are their peers that are in the exact same situation as they are. They're higher mobility. It's kind of hard to keep a job if I've got a mental health issues and a substance abuse issue, and then I also have a higher likelihood of exposure to domestic violence and substance abuse. I read some research, and just to kind of give you some feedback, if I have a substance abusing, and I'm going to use mom, okay? I have a substance abusing mom. She's only substance abusing only. I get her to ART, which is adult residential treatment, and I clean her up, and I pose this question to her. Do you want to go back to your drugs, or do you want your kids back? What is she most likely to say? She wants her kids back. She may relapse, she may have all kinds of issues, but she's most likely to say that. If I have somebody who has a substance abuse and a mental health issue, a severe mental health issue, that schizophrenia piece, severe depression, and I pose that same question, I clean her up, and I say, do you want your drugs or you want your kids? Because of the mental health, the thinking capacity. The other piece that I forgot to say about the schizophrenia, when you look at cognitive or IQ educational levels, schizophrenics are actually at a higher educational level than the other folks with mental health issues. So they're thinking on a whole different planet in a whole different way, but their thinking process is still messed up. So my answer for this is, I think in the circuit, the reason I brought this up, and it's come up within System Solutions for Children, I don't know what the answer is, number one, for the folks that are diagnosed with schizophrenia, and especially paranoid schizophrenia. I really don't know what the answer is for these dual diagnosed folks, and we have to kind of think about safety of the kids, for the kids. I understand what's happening here in one of the counties is we are ordering once a week injections of the medication, which in theory is great because we have a medication compliant parent. But what happens when we pull out? And the problem with this is that if we have I'll say a depressed parent, if you will, if I go off my medication, if I go off my Lexapro, it's going to take me a couple of days for maybe my symptoms to come back, all right? If I've been medication compliant, if you will. If I go off my medication for schizophrenia, I go off perhaps my Librium, my Seroquel. If I go off that, how quickly am I going to start with the symptomology? Very quickly. Our window to intervene is much shorter. And so we really have to think about what are we doing long term for these kids in terms of safety. When we are closing out cases or we even have open cases, it's just a safety issue for me. And then the very last thing I want to talk about is the teenage piece. For those of you in the room that are Escambia County, Angela Ware is going to start working with young parents on an infant mental health piece, and so this is the piece that she will start doing. So if you have some young parents, and Angela, did we decide under 21? 21 and under. So if you have parents 21 and under who have a child and you want to make a referral, Angela will get it. But what we're doing, kind of the framework for us is pregnancy and motherhood. A teenage pregnancy and motherhood does not make you an adult, it just makes you pregnant and a mom. That has to be the framework. We cannot have adult expectations for these young parents. Go back to what I said this morning, that decision-making component of the brain, that prefrontal cortex, is not developed until their teen years and early 20s. So when we ask, what are you thinking? They're not. There's a brain component reason for that. And then remember when we talked this morning about just development, the teenage years are a developmental process in themselves. So what we have is we have two parallel development processes going on. And so what Angela is going to do is look at the teen development piece, look at the baby development piece, and then we've got to somehow combine the two. And that's that dyadic therapy, if you will. What you're going to see, or what you could see with the teenage moms and their babies. After that initial, isn't my baby great kind of thing, everybody look. And then I remember, oh yeah, I'm 15, 16, 17, and there's other things I need to be doing. You're going to see babies that don't smile as much, babies that don't have as much eye contact, and then babies that are just not touched as much as other babies unless we've got a support system in place. You're going to find that the young moms, they talk less to their babies, they give more commands. They're not as committed, they're not as skilled, and they're not as satisfied as the older mom. They're more likely to be physically intrusive, especially initially. They'll be holding those babies when the babies don't want to be held. And they're going to be putting that baby everywhere, physically close to other people. Here's the really big piece, and it doesn't necessarily have to be Angela. For those of you that are working with these young parents, we have to screen them for depression. They are more likely to be depressed than older moms. So we've got to make sure that there's a depression screen, and then they're less knowledgeable about child development. So when you guys are doing that case plan, you want to treat the teen parent or the young parent as a teenager. Get all the things that a teenager needs in place. Get all the things that a parent needs in place, and then get all the things that that relationship needs in place. And so this is the end of the second session, and we're moving now to what you actually do in the afternoon. And so the takeaway for this section is, remember that children live in the context of a relationship, and every decision that you make or fail to make puts that child at a much greater risk. So this afternoon, we're going to talk about the entire process. We will move tables in there. The whole afternoon is audience participation. There's no more talking head. You will actually be doing some work. We also will be making some recommendations to move forward. You guys that are what I call frontline workers, you know what's going on out there. You know what we're doing that's right. You know what we need to stop doing, and you have some really innovative ideas on how we can make some changes. So in the afternoon, that's all we'll be doing.